Hello, everyone. My name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar where every other Tuesday I invite fascinating people with knowledge and experience so that they will help us become better advocates on creating cities that are equitable, sustainable, and playful. Originally, I'm from Bogota, Colombia, where I led the construction of over 200 parks. And I took a small program that was dying of ciclovia open streets of just a few kilometers and few people and turned it into the world's largest pop-up park. It's over 120 kilometers, over 75 miles, over 1.5 million people walking and cycling and running and chatting and shopping and socializing, enjoying the presence of each other. But now I've been living in Toronto, Canada for the last 26 years. And 20 years ago, I created the nonprofit 880 Cities. And this webinar is a way of giving back. That's why it's always free. And I want to thank for the support of 880 Cities and Cities for Better Health. And today, the topic is fascinating. Imagining a life after cars. And the guests are Doug Gordon and Sarah Goodyear, who are co-hosts of a podcast, War on Cars. I'm the all also co-authors, and they just returned from doing presentations all over the US, some in Canada, some in Europe. Doug and Sarah, thanks for accepting the invitation. Welcome. Tell us about yourself and how do you imagine that life after cars? Welcome, Doug. Welcome, Sarah. How are you?
We're
Good.
great.
Thank you so much, Gil. Thanks for having us. And thank you to everybody from all over the world, it seems.
Yeah, it's really exciting to be talking to all of you, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, why don't I'll share my screen and we can get the presentation going because we'll talk a little bit about the podcast, the book, the tour, and just some of the
Yeah,
stuff that we've seen. Yeah, so here we
I
go.
think that's the best way to introduce
Okay, now we
ourselves.
see it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm Doug Gordon. I'm with Sarah, one of the co-hosts of the War on Cars podcast and the co-author of Life After Cars, freeing ourselves from the tyranny of the automobile. We figured since Gil is our gracious host and he's in Toronto, we might just talk briefly about where the name of the podcast comes from, because that is often a question we get. Sarah, do you want to take it away for this part?
Yeah, sure. So, you've heard the phrase the war on cars many times, probably in various headlines. Anytime a parking space is taken away for a bike lane or any other use, people like to say that it's part of the war on cars. So, when we were trying to come up with a title in 2018 for this podcast, we were coming up with lots of terrible ideas. And then I said, hey, why don't we call it? This is the podcast of the war on cars. And I was joking, but then we realized, oh, that's what we should call ourselves, the war on cars. And really, it is Toronto, the former, may he rest in peace, Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto, who said roads were built for buses, cars, and trucks, not for people on bikes. And the very first press conference he gave when he was elected mayor of Toronto, he proudly said, ladies and gentlemen, the war on the car stops today. So it is thank you to Rob Ford that we have the title of our podcast, which has proven somewhat controversial and provocative over the years. A lot of people say, why such an aggressive title? And I think that most people in this audience who are in North America realize that, here in this on this continent, it is a very it's a battle for the streets. And we decided to stake out the territory where we just said very plainly, like, yeah, we think there should be fewer cars in cities. We think cars need to get out of cities, and that's what we represent. And so yeah, that's how we came up with that
Yeah.
name for the podcast.
And as Gil was mentioning, we just wrapped up a really big book tour. These are some of the places we went to. We went to 32 cities. In Canada, we were in Vancouver, Nanaimo, Toronto, and Montreal. And we still have some dates left for the fall, actually, even though I said we wrapped it up. We are still traveling here and there. So there's a lot of hunger out there for the message that we're spreading, which has been great. Um, and we were in some very, very car dependent places, including Los Angeles, Atlanta, Miami, and everywhere we went, we found very enthusiastic crowds for this stuff. We had just had hundreds of people in each place we went to, 1,000 people in Seattle. So there's a real constituency for reimagining cities, having more affordable transportation, as Gil was saying, more active, lively, healthy, happy streets. And we're seeing these changes happen all over the country. Seattle, they tunneled their Alaskan Way viaduct, and now the at-grade boulevard is active a lot of the time, especially just now for the World Cup. Even in places like San Diego, which is a very car dependent, sprawled out place, in the downtown, we saw some like very high quality bike infrastructure. Same with Austin, some really great Dutch style, Dutch red bike lanes through, again, a very car dependent city, in the heart of Texas. Houston, we had 350 people come to our event there and got a really great bike tour from some of the advocates. And they're really making progress pedestrianizing Main Street in the downtown. They have a pretty hostile mayor, speaking of Rob Ford type figures, but they're making the most of it and really activating people to fight for change. Phoenix, one of the most sprawled out, hot cities, they are building protected bike infrastructure in a city that just hasn't really had much in the way of pedestrian space, bike space, park space, and they're making it happen despite the challenges. Memphis, which is really, under assault by our federal government, the state government, and is one of the deadliest cities for pedestrians. I think the deadliest city for pedestrians in the United States. They are slowly but surely building out some good pedestrian and bike infrastructure. It's a little scattershot, but we saw this before and after of what's called the Heights line that connects two greenways. And it's really been great and done in conversation with the community, which has really been great to see. And then in Atlanta, we rode to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta Stadium, I guess, as it was called during the World Cup, with the kids of the Atlanta Bike Bus. And this was just incredible, like taking over these big streets. And even there, they had, as you can see in the picture on the right, some really good high quality bike infrastructure that they're building for all ages, all abilities through a hilly, hot city that is entirely dependent on cars. But we're seeing so many e-bikes and kids and families riding around. It's really encouraging. So we wanted to talk briefly about the book and what's in it. Some of you who have seen us in other cities have probably seen some of this, and we want to get through it quickly so that we can get to your questions and just have a conversation with Gil, because that's our sort of favorite part of doing these events. So, when we started Sarah, maybe you want to just take like why we changed the title to Life
Yeah.
After Cars.
Yeah, sure. So as much as we love the War on Cars as a name for the podcast, and we thought that would be what the book was going to be called, and our editor called us pretty late in the production process, and she said, "So, would you be open to having a different title rather than the War on Cars for the book?" And we thought about it. I said, "Sure, what are you thinking?" Because they were worried that it was a confusing title, that people might think it was a pro car book, that they might be put off by the war on cars. So we said, yeah, we're easy. Let's talk about it. And somebody in the marketing department at Penguin Random House came up very quickly with the idea of Life After Cars, and we all just loved it, because this is also a provocation, just like the war on cars, but it is also an invitation. It's an invitation to imagine what our lives could be like if we didn't have automobile dependence as integrated into the fabric of our lives as we do. And let's think about what that means. What do we mean when we say a life after cars, freeing ourselves from the tyranny of the automobile? We're talking about giving people choices and giving people options and freedom, because the car has been sold as freedom, but we all know that actually the car is something that ends up being something that you're working for the car, rather than the car working for you. So yeah, so we went with this as sort of an imagination, a spur to imagination for what we could have in the future. And that's really what this book is trying to aim us toward.
And what we were trying to do in the book is really bring in an audience that hasn't thought about these issues all that much. We knew that a lot of people, probably like the people who are watching this, and we certainly our listeners for the podcast, would be interested in the book. But we wanted to make sure that it was speaking to people who might not give up their car keys tomorrow, but at least could say, "Wow, I hadn't thought of it that way." And this isn't just a given. Cars are not a law of nature. Highways are not a law of nature. They're not just part of the landscape. We can do something about it. So the question we really had was, how do you get into this topic, which is so big and so expansive, in a way that's accessible and novel? And so what we decided to do in the beginning of the book, rather than start with the invention of cars and a kind of dry history of the Model T or something like that, we started with this comic book, Action Comics number 12, which was published in May 1939. And it is one of the earliest appearances of Superman. And in this story, Clark Kent comes out of the newspaper he works for as a mild-mannered reporter and sees that a crowd has gathered and a good friend of his has been hit and killed by a reckless driver. And this gets Clark Kent very agitated, and he calls the mayor and says, what are you going to do about it? And the mayor says, what can anyone do? So he changes into his Superman costume and breaks through the walls of a radio station and declares to the citizens of Metropolis that the auto accident death rate of this community is one that should shame us all. He talks about how more people have been killed needlessly by autos than died during the World War. He's talking about the Great War, World War One. And he declares a war on reckless drivers, saying that homicidal drivers will answer to him. So even Rob Ford did not come up with the term the war on cars. Superman back in the day was declaring a war on reckless drivers. And then Superman goes on a rampage around the city, really actually waging war on bad driving and bad institutional uh, problems. He goes to a used car lot and destroys all of the inventory because the used car dealer is selling dangerous lemons and says, "I'm going to enjoy this private little war." He goes to an automobile factory and just lays waste to the factory's manufacturing equipment, every tool, every piece of equipment. And no one can stop this sort of like enraged Superman. Then he grabs the city's mayor, who is a bit of a leadfoot. He finds him speeding around town. And this is the reason I guess the mayor didn't want to do anything about traffic violence and blames the mayor, saying, you didn't worry much about killing the others, and says that it's basically by not enforcing the law and dealing with this problem, you are the reason so many of these people died.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then,
Superman really holds the powerful to account and puts the blame where it belongs at the top.
yeah. And he then flies the mayor up to the city morgue and shows him the maimed bodies of auto victims and says, to Sarah's point, these are the men that you killed with your policies. And this is pretty radical stuff. This is 1939. This is not the Superman we think of today with the Christopher Reeve movies or the more recent DC movies where it's like truth, justice, and the American way. This is a really like vigilante Superman taking on social problems of the day. And so the
Yeah,
question, is why start in 1939 with this Superman comic?
right. And why were Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who came up with Superman, why was this something that they would see as one of the burning social problems of the day? Well, it's because it was a burning problem. In the year that Siegel and Schuster were born, 1914, there were 4,700 people killed in automobile crashes in the United States of America. By 1939, just 25 years later, that number was 32,386. And to put that in perspective, the population of the United States at that time was about 130 million. So this was a traffic fatality rate of about 30 per 100,000 population. Today, we are running more around the number below 37,000 to 40,000. 40,000 is often the number you hear thrown around. And yes, the United States has a population of 340 million now, and the traffic fatality rate is lower per 100,000. It's now around 13. But to put that in perspective, in other wealthy nations around the world, it is much lower than that. Even in Canada, it's between 5 and 6 per 100,000, which is a country that obviously is very much the same as the United States. And one of the things that we like to talk about is the way that our acceptance of traffic violence in this country, the United States of America, has led to the acceptance of a culture of violence elsewhere. It's part of a pervasive culture of violence in this country, and we need to acknowledge it as such.
Yeah, and so that's the big question that we are asking in the book is that most people don't really think of this as the kind of social problem in need of a superhero as it was in 1939, and even in 1924. If you've read Peter Norton's Fighting Traffic, you're probably familiar with the image on the left about just how upset people were about the violence that was being unleashed on our streets by the automobile. You see the figure of death. It might not be entirely clear, but in the lower part of this image, it's running over, women and children. And then flash forward to nearly 100 years later, and people are just fighting over parking spaces in the wake of a young woman on a bicycle who was killed by a taxi driver, a truck driver on Central Park West. And it's like, which is more important, parking spaces or people's lives? Sorry, cyclists. So that sort of, the idea that we take this for granted, we don't see this as a problem, is something we wanted to open people's eyes to in the book. And there's a name for this phenomenon.
Yeah, it's motonormativity, which is a fantastic word and a very useful concept. It's, of course, echoing heteronormativity, and it's just trying to capture just how pervasive and all-enveloping our acceptance of automobiles is. And this comes out of the research of Dr. Ian Walker in the United Kingdom, a really fantastic thinker who maybe many of you know. And this research has also been replicated in the United States by Tara Goddard. But Ian Walker and his colleagues asked, do we have standards, different standards for moral behavior when cars are involved? That's basically the thing they wanted to get to the bottom. And to figure that out, they asked this question: people shouldn't smoke in highly populated areas where other people have to breathe in cigarette fumes. They state that 75% of people agree with that. But then if you change a couple of words, people shouldn't drive in highly populated areas where other people have to breathe in car fumes, only 17% agree. And this was one of several questions in the survey that revealed that people are willing to forgive behavior from drivers that they would never, ever, ever accept from anybody else. And I think we all know, you can call it car brain, you can call it motonormativity, but the excuses that we make for people driving cars, it's really a huge part of the problem here. And Dr. Walker makes the point that we observe a world where cars come first. We observe a world where fast antisocial motoring is condoned or even encouraged. There are no consequences for killing another person as long as you do it the right way. And this really is the heart of the problem with motonormativity, is that it blinds us to the actual disaster that's around us. And he talks about the is-ought fallacy, where we think something is, we see that something is, that there are lots of cars, and we think that's the way it ought to be. And this is also where the name Life After Cars come in, because there's nobody alive today who remembers the world before cars, life before cars. So it takes an enormous amount of imagination and struggle to figure out what a life after cars is going to be. But we need to shed that motonormative mindset. And that's a lot of what this book is trying to do, is to help people see things in a different way and to challenge that motonormativity. And this is Haight Street in 1967 in the beautiful city of San Francisco. This was the summer of love. And the reason that this is in here is right around this time, San Francisco was doing planning for its future. And as part of that planning, they hired a guy from UC Berkeley named Donald Appleyard. And many of you are probably familiar with his wonderful book, Livable Streets, which was based on the research that he did as part of this study for San Francisco. He looked at 3 different types of streets: heavy traffic, moderate traffic, and light traffic. And with his colleagues, they went door to door. They asked people about their social ties on the street, their feelings about the street, what they liked, what they didn't like. And what they found was a dramatic thing about social life, which is that people on light traffic streets had 3 times as many friends and twice as many acquaintances locally as those who lived on heavy traffic streets. Not only that, a lot of people who live in the heavy traffic streets expressed the desire, like they wanted to be inside. They didn't want to be on the street. They were hurrying to get inside. They felt isolated. Real estate values on those streets were dropping, and a lot of people who lived there were older and were basically trapped there, and some of them, trapped alone in their apartments, essentially. And this is the withering away of social networks that automobiles causes. It's something that is, it can be measured qualitatively, and he did that, and that was a huge milestone in our understanding of how cars affect our social lives.
And the really interesting thing that we talk about a lot in our presentations is that when Appleyard did this study, it's the late 1960s, white flight is in full effect by this point. And there are all these stories, as there are often today, about how cities are dens of inequities and crime and all this stuff. And the media narrative is that cities are filthy and awful and no one wants to live there. But actually, when they talked to these people, and Appleyard and his team talked to these people, they said, "What are your top fears living on the street?" Crime was not number one. Traffic was number one. And so it shows really that it probably wasn't so much crime that hollowed out our cities. It was the automobile.
And yeah, Appleyard said the reason this is important: the social relations that take place on the street, its potential for neighborliness and street life, are values of urban life to be treasured. And I mean, really, these are words to live by from 1981. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the years since that time is that those values have often not been treasured, but rather have been actively destroyed. But there are so many people, many of them right here, who are trying to be better stewards of this very, very important part of our lives.
Yeah, and I think there's so many encouraging things, as we were saying, the World Cup and the way that like cities like Seattle, Toronto, et cetera, were activated and people took a new relationship with the streets, the Knicks championship here in New York City that brought people out to street corners and filling public squares and streets. The one perhaps positive thing to come out of COVID, open streets and outdoor dining, et cetera. I think people are starting to awaken to this idea that streets can be, as Gil said, playful. They can be places where we can meet our neighbors. They can be core components in the fight for democracy, as we saw in Minneapolis and other cities where neighbors come and help other neighbors and take to the streets very quickly. So I think there are signs of life and signs of hope. But yeah, we'd really love to just get to kind of the discussion and questions. You can find more about the book at lifeaftercars.com, and obviously find us, listen to the podcast wherever finer podcasts are sold. So
Or given away for free.
or given away for free on the internet. Yeah, no, we really want to thank Gil. I think this whole idea, that's what we're really trying to do, is build a place where young and old and everyone in between have equal rights to the city, to their streets, to their neighborhoods and their communities. So thank you all.
This is the last question. You have people here from Guayaquil, Ecuador, from Krakow, Poland, from all across the US and Canada. Each one of you separately, what is your call to action? You just finished a tour in many, many cities, small and large. By the way, people, when you talk about a car-free city, people talk, 90% are thinking bicycles, bicycles, bicycles. Well, in the US, there is no city really with more than 5% of bike trips. 100% people walk. I don't know why cycling seems to be more sexy, and even the questions people put up so many questions about cycling. I mean, I bike every day. I have nothing against cyclists, but I'm just concerned why when 100% of the people walk, I walk to my bike. I walk from my bike to places. Somehow pedestrians are not paying so much attention. So please tell us, each one of you, what is your call to action to all of us that are here listening to you?
I think you have to call your elected officials and tell them you want this. You want a safer crosswalk or sidewalks where there aren't sidewalks, or bike lanes where there aren't bike lanes, or restrictions on driving where there are no restrictions on driving. Because in the recent bonus we just put out today, we talk about this concept of pluralistic ignorance, where everybody thinks everybody else is against the thing that they're for, and nobody wants to speak up. And so the incentives are all messed up, and those citizens against almost everything, they are the ones calling their elected officials saying, don't take my parking, don't make it harder for me to drive. The elected officials need to hear from what I think is the majority of the people who, if asked, say, yeah, I think we should take sensible solutions to make our cities a little bit safer so that everybody, like you said, can walk, can get to where they're going, can just be outside, can just meet their neighbors. Call and I think talk to your neighbors as well. You're going to find there are more people who are like you than who are not.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is my call to action is find your people. Find the people in your community who care about this stuff. You may find them at the bike shop. You may find them at the coffee shop. You may find them in an organization like, a transit advocacy organization or a bicycling advocacy organization. Almost every city or town has one. Find those people and build each other up. There are going to be tough times. It's not always going to be easy. We need solidarity in this world more than ever. And remember that an organization that can fight effectively for better streets and safer streets for its people is also an anti-fascist organization.
Thank you, thank you. Great. Show up, show up.
Show up.
Either by that, sending an email or making a phone call or providing a small donation to any community group, but show up. Sarah and Doug, thank you very much. What an amazing presentation. I enjoyed it so much from learning that Superman was helping decades ago on this issue and how a city can be if we imagine life after cars. It's not that there's not going to be any cars, but it's that cars are going to play a smaller role. And we're going to also walk and bike, and we are going to use public spaces. So I hope that everybody who's watching will share this video with their decision makers, elected officials, city staff, advocates, community groups, students. Thanks a lot. And I hope to see everyone 2 weeks from today.